Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is in Eau Claire. We're on the campus of the Chippewa Valley Tech College. We're interviewing Mr. Robert Burke of Hudson. He's a Libertarian candidate for governor. Mr. Burke, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you. Thank you for having me very much.
Program note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Mr. Burke, first-time candidate, give us the short version of your bio.
Sure. I bring a unique background. I spent 13 years working as a financial services wholesaler, working in long-term care planning. I understand very specifically the needs of our seniors. It helped me to understand a lot of the issues and the dynamic problems that our society faces. And frankly, I bring the most pragmatic street-level approach to understanding how an economy really works.
Well, let's talk about that. What are the major issues that got you into running for governor as a libertarian?
I began back in 2009, 2010 when they had the crash. And so when I sat back and I said, wow, you know, my company took some major hits in this. What happened? I delved deeply into the research of how we ended up with a housing crash. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I understood the implications for the long-term care insurance that I was selling. Our manipulated stock market, our manipulated financial and capital markets are actually harming our senior citizens significantly. It may feel good to get your Social Security check, but the price of all of your food has gone up at the grocery store, 7, 8, 10%. We see our insurance rates, the cost of buying your auto insurance, your homeowner's insurance, your long-term care insurance. All of these are affected by a low interest rate that's manipulated by the Federal Reserve right now. And all of this is going to eventually change. The interest rate will go up. It'll cause a tightening at the federal level, and we're going to have to deal with that here at the state level. And when I was laid off in 2012, I made the decision I need to do something about this, not just for myself, but for my kids' future, and for the future of all the people who I help to sell insurance to.
You've just laid out a whole bunch of national issues, yet you're running for governor, a state office. What difference can a governor make addressing some of these major financial national issues, sir?
So let's talk about our deficit. We have a $1 trillion, actually it's about a 1.3, and when you add in all of the things they don't talk about, we probably have closer to a $1.5 trillion annual deficit. This doesn't include...
You're just talking state government.
Our federal government.
Federal government, go ahead.
Okay. Eventually, those programs that are causing that deficit are going to have to be reined in. The amount of money the states are going to get from Medicare, from Medicaid, the amount of money that will come in the Social Security checks to the people of Wisconsin, all of these things are going to be problems that Wisconsin is going to have to deal with. These are issues that are going to have severe implications on how we design the programs, in particular with things like Medicare and Medicaid. And since all problems are local, we need somebody at the state level who has a better understanding of the implications of the federal spending reductions that are going to come so that we can better address it by changing the system at the local level. And we can do a lot at the local level to make things better in that scenario.
Well, let's assume that your scenario is correct and Wisconsin residents are getting less Medicaid, Social Security. What state options should the state government in any way consider filling in some of those gaps? Or what new potential issues would that drop off in income pose for state government, Mr. Burke?
So what we have to do is we have to first and foremost streamline the system and collapse the size of our government here at the state level. There are a number of programs the state's involved in that they shouldn't be involved in. In particular is the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. The WEDC takes taxpayer dollars and it gives it to private businesses in the idea that it's going to start generating businesses. And unfortunately what we're finding is that the percentage of loans is about 10 times that of the private industry that are failing. In other words, about 2% of a bank would be considered bad news. I understand the latest report is we're about 20% failed dollars at the WEDC. Those are the taxpayers on the hook for that money in an effort to try and generate jobs, of which out of 250,000 the governor said he was going to generate, he's only generated about 105, 110,000. And in fact, I think in the summer here that those numbers actually may have gone backwards. I understand we've had some other job losses in the state, and these problems are escalating. We don't have anybody who has an idea of how to deal with the problems. So not only do we need to look at that part of the argument, which is, do we need to have a WEDC to create jobs? No. What we do at the government level is we either get in the way of creating jobs or we get out of the way of creating jobs. And I have the best plan for getting out of the way of creating jobs. The first one is to get rid of the property tax and to get rid of the sales tax, or excuse me, the income tax. When you create a product, all products have three basic inputs. You have the labor input, of which we have a phenomenally educated population here in the state. You have the raw material inputs, of which we have many great natural resources we can take advantage of. But that third input is the government input. Those are the taxes and the regulations. By creating a low tax and a low regulation state, that doesn't mean that we allow pollution to happen. It doesn't mean we have workers taken advantage of. It just means that we try to remove those costs from producing a product so that it's cheaper to make a widget in Wisconsin than it is to make that widget anywhere else. Where are you going to open up that factory? And when we look at things like innovation, I want to legalize hemp. We need to get hemp back in the marketplace. We have paper mills that are closing down in our state. We have huge holes in our industries that are occurring. And at the state level, a hemp nullification bill, which means you can now grow hemp legally at the state level, a hemp nullification bill would allow us to actually create brand new industries. And if we don't get to the front of this line in terms of legalization, we'll get beat by states like Tennessee, who are literally in the midst of legalizing hemp. And so the new manufacturing that will come out of that, they'll build those factories in Tennessee because they got there first.
But you want to get rid of two of the biggest taxes in Wisconsin, the property tax, which pays for schools and local governments. How are you going to make up that money that now relied on by schools and local governments?
We're going to switch to a sales tax. We'll do a two-tiered sales tax is the current plan, and I would need more help to actually whittle down which side of the system this works, exactly what the amounts would be. But we would have a two-tier sales tax. The first one would be on food, clothing, housing, and energy. Those are what we would call the baseline needs of all people in the society, the most used items. Okay. Now, all the taxes for these items are already built into the product. When you go and you buy a box of Lucky Charms, okay, the sales tax for the income tax of the CEO of General Mills, the income tax, all the property taxes, the farmer, of the mill, all of these costs are built into that product already. By going with the sales tax, all we're doing is saying, look, I'm going to actually tell you how much you're being taxed. You're actually going to know at the front side how much the state is collecting from you, which you don't have right now. If your raw grains for that box of cereal are grown here in Wisconsin, right now the income taxes and the property taxes, those farmers are built into those, and they're in those boxes of cereals that you buy. You just don't know it. So it isn't that we're not going to collect those tax dollars. What we're going to say is our lowest tax level is going to be on the things that are used the most and are most critical for our poor and our senior citizens on fixed income. The second is going to be a second tier just for all other basic consumption goods. It's time for us to stop using the tax system to mold social behavior. That's just an illegitimate use of government.
So you're going to propose tax structures, sales tax structures that would take the place of both the property taxes and the state income taxes.
Correct.
Okay. So you have basic services. If your kid needs Lucky Charms, you're going to pay one rate. If you go out and buy a Maserati, you're going to pay a higher state sales tax?
Well, and you make a great example of why this system works. When you look at the things that the poor buy, for example, when they go to buy a bottle of mustard, they buy a bottle of generic mustard. Or the wealthy go and buy a bottle of Grey Poupon. They're going to pay $4 for that bottle of mustard, or they're going to pay 40 cents in tax. Whereas the poor person's going to pay a $1 mustard and pay a dime in taxes. And that works all the way up the entire economic structure. We know the poor go and buy a used 2003 Chevy Impala. The wealthy buy a brand new Mercedes every 2 years. They'll voluntarily tax themselves at a higher rate if we let them. And it's also a far simpler and a far more agile system for the state to police. Right now you have to police 4 million people. If we only police the employers of the state, that's a much smaller number, probably a couple 100,000.
This major tax code change, is it something that can be achieved or even pursued when this week the Fiscal Bureau reported a potential deficit of $1.7 billion in the next 2-year spending cycle?
None of my plans really are probably going to be considered as long as people hold on to the idea that this economic model is sustainable. So I'm fully willing to admit that people are not going to look at completely changing our tax system so long as they think the existing system works for them. I'm talking about changing the system in an environment where things are much more radically fluid. And that'll happen eventually. I really do mean this. When people start to realize that the federal government has promised over 100, and you can use a number of different ways to calculate it, anywhere from 100 to 130 trillion dollars of unfunded liabilities, that is Social Security checks, Medicare checks, Medicaid checks to hospitals, that they cannot pay. The money, ladies and gentlemen, the money is not there to pay for these programs. There's going to have to be cuts. There are going to be changes in the system. And, you know, in healthcare in particular, for one, people say, Bob, what would you do to change that system? I got a real simple solution to begin the change. And that is, I'm going to want our hospitals and I'm going to want our clinics to begin posting in a very prominent way the cost for all of your basic cares and services. When I walk into a hospital to visit a doctor, I should know what that doctor visit's going to cost me. I can't do anything to help improve the system until I put market signals back in place.
You've talked about how you would change the major changes to the tax code structure, but you also said it's probably not realistic to achieve anytime soon.
Politically realistic.
Politically,
we could do it if we had the will tomorrow.
Right.
But as long as people don't believe that there's any problem with the current tax system, it's not going to happen.
Okay, so then come back to my question. If there is a $1 billion potential budget deficit in the next biennial budget, how would you fix it if you can't reach for this larger changes?
So the first thing we would do is a fairly large review of what our state government is actually spending money on. I'll be honest with you. The state budget, rather, and the number of programs that we're involved in that really only benefit a small number of people in very specific areas. A review of those programs needs to be done, and there's probably a whole lot of programs we'll begin shutting down and closing off. If I'm not mistaken, the Department of Workforce Development gets somewhere in the range of $360 to $370 million a year. I'm pretty sure I can find some programs in there to cut. You know, when we talk about this budget deficit, I was actually on record back in January when I was asked by our local media, Mr. Burke, what would you do with this $1 billion surplus that they're expecting? I said there wasn't going to be a $1 billion surplus. I've called the reduction in tax revenues since, well, easily beginning of 2013 when I began my party affiliate over in Hudson. But I'm very concerned about people not paying attention. The Federal Reserve is reducing the buying of U.S. Treasuries. They're reducing their investment in the market, and we are going to continue to see a slowdown in our stock market. We're going to see a slowdown in our economies. We're going to see a reduction in the amount of tax revenue that are taken in, because everything in this economy is driven right now by the Federal Reserve. It is the most manipulative thing occurring. And while we all think things are unicorns and rainbow out there, I want to tell you right now, we're about to see some serious slowdowns in our economic model going on, not only in our state, but in our nation. This is an interconnected worldwide economy. And when I see the home bubble in China bursting, it makes me very concerned about capital markets, not just in China, but the contagion effect that can have on U.S. markets. We buy a lot of our goods from China. We have our number one trading partner is China. And if you really want to look at one of the things that could impact Wisconsin most negatively, it's the Import-Export Bank, which has been a terrible thing for the U.S. to have. However, when you look at who takes the largest advantage of the Import-Export Bank after Washington State, and in particular for Boeing, it happens to be Wisconsin. And I'm guessing it has to do with GE Medical. And that's one of the things we need to be very concerned about is if China changes, if their economy begins to slow down, what sort of impact is that going to have on Wisconsin?
One of the biggest items in the next two-year budget, which governors must submit, is state aid for our schools. What priorities would you have if you submitted a budget in terms of school funding, sir?
School funding is a really important part of our budget. And as a constitutional amendment item, that is, our Constitution requires that we provide education. Generally, a libertarian would be for as free an education as possible for you to be able to go out and make your decision on what kind of education and where that education is received for your own children. Okay. But in the state of Wisconsin, we do have a requirement that the state provide that education. I prefer that we look at going to a fully vouchered system. I would expand it to every single child in the state, and I would do that tomorrow. It doesn't mean that we don't have public schools. It means that those children who may be able to get a better education in a different model will have that access to that model. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Again, we have 15 choices of bread when we go to the store. We have 20 choices of jelly. We have hundreds of choices in cars. Why is it we have one primary choice for education, and only if you're wealthy enough, only if you can afford to pay twice, only if you can afford to pay the property taxes and afford to pay a private school, can you send your kids to a private school? That's a ridiculous system. And to say that all we're trying to do is give vouchers to the wealthy, that's a ludicrous position. I'm trying to give the poorest kids of this state access to alternative types of education so that they can try and make the most in their life.
Governor Walker over the weekend called for Wisconsin to withdraw from the Common Core educational standards. Your position?
I had a number of very interesting conversations at the county fairs with teachers at the Democrat Party booth, and a number of retired teachers. And here's the one thing we all agreed on. The teachers need control of their classrooms back. First and foremost, every single teacher said, Bob, I need my classroom back. I need the administration, I need the state, and I need the federal government to get out of my classroom. And I agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. In fact, the idea of having a vouchered education system would be so somebody could choose to actually take the best teachers' classes. So that best teacher's class and that best teacher's practices get picked up by other teachers. So they want to do what they're doing because they see that it's successful, because they see that it's wanted. But until we have that type of classroom innovation at its greatest level, which is financial remuneration. Look, if you're a great teacher, you do a good job, kids are going to want to take your class. You'll make more money in that model. There's nothing wrong with that model. We need to stop sending all of our money to Washington, D.C., so that the National Education Association, so that these organizations in Washington, D.C. can create a criteria for our education standards in a state that doesn't really represent the needs and frankly, the culture of Wisconsin. We have great teachers. We have great schools. We have great students. We don't need D.C.'s help. Don't send our monies to Washington, D.C. Leave them here, and let's reinvest them into our schools the way they should be.
Transportation funding. There are projections that the transportation fund will be $700 million short in the next biennium. How would you fix any deficit?
Well, I think we should look at where we're building new roads. I think that's a really important part of this. I know that we have a number of projects that are for expanding from 2-lane to 4-lane, our infrastructure, and I think these are good things. But at the same time, we have communities that we've built 4-lane highways into and out of that are not showing the fruits of the money that we've spent. And before we start spending more money expanding more 4-lane routes into more rural areas of Wisconsin, we should consider what parts of the infrastructure we already have that we should make sure that we maintain at a high level and begin prioritizing our projects from that down.
And not raise our gas tax or the 75.
We don't need to raise the gas tax. We're paying $3.50 for a gallon of gas right now. The last thing we need is to make that $4. You know what I see every time I have to go to the grocery store? I see an additional $4 bill for my gas. That's what I see. Okay? And imagine what that feels like for our poor and for our senior citizens in fixed income.
We talked about health care. Let's come back to the issue of Medicaid. 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care from Medicaid. The American Hospital Association says our Medicaid reimbursement rate's second lowest in the nation. Should they be increased?
They should be increased, but I think we have to have some other reforms in the system first. Again, I have to get market signals back in the system before I can start talking about how I save more money or I don't save more money. Right. And that's got to be really at the very heart of this thing. When I don't want to get bogged down in, Bob, would you give more money to health care? Would you give less money to health care? First of all, I've got to get health care to admit that they have their own problem. And their biggest problem is you're not telling anybody what the costs are, and so we don't have an informed consumer. So I'm not going to throw more money or less money at a problem until I start doing something about the problem itself, which is let's get a cost structure in place that everybody in the industry is working on first and foremost. Then we can start talking about Medicaid. Now here, I'll tell you what the big problem with Medicaid is. The big problem with Medicaid is that in 1995, the Boston Commission changed the way we calculate our inflation. They added in 3 measurements in particular: hedonics, geometric weighting, and substitution. And I recommend that if you're not familiar with these, you go out and you do your own homework. Just type in Boston Commission's. Hedonics is a great start. And what they did was they changed the calculation of inflation, which is the increase that's added to the cost we pay to our hospitals and especially our nursing homes and long-term care facilities every year. When you change that calculation, one individual, John Williams, who's an economist, shadowstats.com, calculates that we've underfunded Social Security and Medicare increases for inflation by as much as 72%. You want to know why we're unfunded? We're underfunded because the government changed the calculation and lied to the people about what's actually happening. These are the problems within the system. And none of the other people running for office are talking about the places where their own people, their own teammates, changed the game, lied to the people of the American public. And now we wonder why we don't have this. This is one of the reasons I ran. We have so terribly underfunded our long-term care insurance, our long-term care network, and our Medicaid, that our hospitals that have long-term care wings have begun to jettison them. We have assisted living now taking the only cash payment processors of the system, which isn't a bad thing, but your assisted living facilities are primarily cash pay programs or insurance pay programs. This has left our nursing homes to be primarily paid for by our Medicaid dollars, and since 1995, the Boston Commission, which was created by the red team and the blue team, has consistently created a formula that underfunds our long-term care and our Medicare and our Medicaid increases as well. These are huge problems. These are systemic problems that can't be fixed at the state level. But if we understand the cause of the problem at the state level, we can at least advocate with our congressmen and our senators to fix some of this problem.
Coming from western Wisconsin, living in western Wisconsin, you must be asked about the two mine issues, the Gogebic open pit iron mine in Ashland and Iron County. What's your position on that? And secondly, the explosion of frac sand mining in western Wisconsin.
Well, we have I don't know how you describe it another way than a silicon gold boom here. We do have the frac sand that is the best frac sand in the nation, I suppose, I understand, for frac sand mining. A libertarian would look at the issue slightly differently. You know, we changed our laws about 100 years ago, and we moved away from what was called common law, a common property protection law, which said if I own a farm and I have a stream coming through my farm, if somebody off of my property is polluting my farm stream and my animals can't drink that water anymore, I should be able to sue that organization, right, and go after that organization for the pollution on my property. Because we have things like the EPA, we have things like the DNR, they set these levels of pollution that are allowable, so that even when your land gets polluted, you can't do anything about it because the EPA gave them a license that says you can pollute this much, or the DNR says as long as only this much frac sand goes into the river, we're fine. Two things that I would change. The first one is I would go back and I would give some common land law protection to landowners. There are a number of people that I've seen around the area. I believe there's one over specifically, I want to say by Toma, where this poor lady bought a house. It was a dream house out in the country, and all of a sudden she's got trucks driving by and dust kicking up, and nobody wants to buy her house. She's lost the value of her home, but she has no protection from that type of pollution, and it's a very real type of pollution. We would give her a system where they would be able to actually address the pollution caused by the trucks, or the mine would have to actually buy the house and relieve them of that loss. The second thing I would do is that when pollution is caused in our system, I would actually find the owners who are causing the pollution. You know, people like to say guns don't kill people, people kill people. Companies don't pollute, people pollute. And I want to find the individual's personal wealth when they cause these types of pollution. So if they want to build a mine, if they want to dig a mine in the Gogebic area, and they can do that without harming anybody else's property, value, or quality of life around them, knock yourself out. You should be more than welcome to do that. However, that decision should come at the local level. People in Madison and Milwaukee should not be making a decision of whether or not the mining goes on up in the Ashland area. That should be done with the residents up there, and they should be asking themselves, what are the pollution risks? What are the environmental risks? Do we accept them? And then more importantly, do the people who want to dig the mine accept the risk that if you harm the values of the property around the mine, you're going to pay for those personally from the mine, and if you are negligent in that act, we're going to find the mine owner's personal wealth. We never do that. Think about this right now. The BP Amoco spill, BP Amoco came out and said, hey, we paid $26 billion to clean this up. BP Amoco didn't spend $26 billion. No. You know what they did? They passed that on to everybody who went to their pumps, and they passed it on to everybody who bought food in their stores. That's who paid the $26 billion to clean up the Gulf. And when I look at the fines that are passed out in Wisconsin to these companies who have frac sand mines that get washed into rivers, or these other companies who pollute our waterways or the neighbors next to them, I don't see owners being fined. I see the companies being fined. And you know what the companies do? They go out and they acquire debt, and they just add the fine in as part of their business expense. This isn't changing behavior. When I get a speeding ticket, I don't hand my speeding ticket over to my car and ask my car to pay it. I pay that speeding ticket. And when these mine owners pollute our areas, pollute our wetlands, the mine owners should be personally responsible. I only have to find one of those once. And that cleans up the whole thing, I promise you.
This is a City of Milwaukee issue, but I'm asking of all candidates for governor. Should state aid be involved in a new arena for the Milwaukee Bucks? And as you're aware, the NBA contract said if there's no arena, the Bucks go away in 2017.
Hey, whatever market you guys find, man, enjoy it. I'm not giving money to you. You guys are all millionaires, hundreds of millionaires. You don't need my money. If there's a financial reason for you guys to build a stadium in the Milwaukee area and the marketplace will support it, then build your stadium there, and you're more than welcome to do that. And if the local Milwaukee market would like to tax themselves, and that decision is made by the local Milwaukee residents, knock yourself out. I think that it's a local issue, and that's where the money should come from. But I can't collect tax dollars from somebody living in Hayward to pay for a millionaire's basketball dome in Milwaukee. That's just not right.
You mentioned the potential growth of businesses if we legalized hemp. The bill legalizing medical marijuana is going to be reintroduced. States of Colorado and Washington have legalized recreational marijuana. Your position?
I'm for full legalization of marijuana. We cause far more harm with our criminalization than would be caused. In fact, in Colorado, what they're seeing is that crime levels almost across the board are down. When you stop giving people tickets, when you stop giving people criminal records for something like marijuana, what you do is you keep giving them job opportunities. You keep giving them educational opportunities. You keep giving them a reason to stop using marijuana. But when you give a 19 or 20-year-old kid a ticket for smoking pot, all you've done is said to their employers, their future potential employers, don't hire this guy. Why? Well, because he smokes pot once in a while. If you didn't know he smoked pot once in a while, you would probably think he's a great employee, shows up on time, does his job, is courteous and thoughtful. But somehow, just because somebody decides that they want to smoke a flower periodically, we have to take away education and job opportunities from them. And this doesn't help people to move on from utilizing pot. Now, I've been out to Colorado, and I'd say this about Colorado's model. If we try to do this piecemeal, if we try to do medical marijuana, and then we try to do recreational, you're going to create two disparately separate systems. You're going to encourage fraud, and it's so much easier if we just do this right from the beginning and admit and acknowledge that there's already a marijuana industry in Wisconsin. It's at least a tens of million, if not hundreds of $1 million a year industry in Wisconsin. All we're asking is let's bring it above board. And by bringing it above board, it helps to keep it out of our kids' hands. That's one of my big keys in this. I want to get marijuana out of our high schools. If you want to know how bad the problem really is, go ask your kids, is it easier to get marijuana in school or is it easier to get alcohol? And they'll all tell you it's easier to get pot, by a long shot. And the reason for that is when somebody is willing to break the law and sell marijuana illegally, selling to a 15 or a 16-year-old or a 7, it's no big deal. It doesn't bother them whatsoever. Whereas, much like a liquor store, if you had a taxed and regulated entity who was actually providing the product, you wouldn't have 17-year-olds walking in and saying, "Hey, give me an eighth of weed." They're not going to do that. They're not going to risk their license.
First offense, drunken driving, should it be a crime?
It should not be a crime. I have a DUI, and I have a lot to say about the issue of drunk driving. And I think there's a real need to address the issue of drinking and driving. I shouldn't have been driving that night. But, of all the things that I went through in their program, what made the biggest difference? It was the victim impact panel. Listening to people talk about the kids that they lost. And a lot of the other parts of the process that we use really could be used and handled at the insurance level. Our insurance company should be told, listen, this individual got a DUI, and I'd like you to help work with them to create a risk mitigation plan. Maybe that risk mitigation plan says that you need to go to a victim impact panel. Maybe it's 2. Let the insurance companies who specialize in risk management do the homework on this and say, how do we reduce the number of drunk drivers? Because again, much like the issue with pot legalization, every time we give someone a DUI, every time somebody ends up in our legal system, they lose future job opportunities where they stop drinking, going to the bar at night because now they have this next job opportunity. That doesn't happen when people lose those opportunities because of something like a first DUI that makes them a criminal.
I listened to your interview at Wisconsin Public TV, and you were asked about there's 2 Burkes running for governor. Would you be running for governor if Mary Burke wasn't also running for governor? Is the 2 Burke phenomena going to help you?
Well, the name recognition obviously helps me, and I've said from the very start that was one of the reasons why I made the decision to run. In October of last year, I was looking at the upcoming election season, and I asked myself, what do we need to actually impact this race? And the biggest thing that we really needed was we need somebody at the top of the ticket who could effectuate an argument and a discussion around what we would classically consider an intangible subject. And it's not easy to explain an intangible topic or issue or idea to people. We looked long and hard, actually. We looked at a number of different candidates that we were courting to run for governor. And in the end, the person who had the skill set, I was a financial services wholesaler. My job was to sell intangible ideas. And the person who had the best name recognition idea to gain back the party's ballot status for our 2016 presidential happened to be putting me on the ballot. That's really how it came down.
And then final question, do you want to highlight quickly major differences between you and Mary Burke and Scott Walker?
There's three major differences between the other two candidates and myself. The first one is that I'm the only candidate who supports full legalization of marijuana. Most people will tell you that government is really good at giving away things. Here's what I'm going to give away to the voters of Wisconsin. If your son or your daughter, your brother, your sister, your grandma, your grandpa, your moms, or your dads have been arrested for a nonviolent small possession of marijuana, I'm going to start a program of pardons. I'm going to give you your life back. You're not going to have to go in and fill out that job application, tell them you had a bag of weed when you were 12, when you were 18. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fight hard to change our tax system. We have got to get rid of the property tax in particular. We are in the midst of a housing bubble. So as property values go up, it may seem like a really good thing. But for people who paid off their home 20 years ago, living on a fixed income in retirement, having their property taxes go from $3,000 to $4,000 a year doesn't help them. It doesn't help them in the very least. And the very last thing is I would change, in particular, the nature of the relationship with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. The WEDC link would be cut. They're welcome to operate as a nonprofit organization. But Governor Walker should not be the CEO, or the chair rather, of a venture capital fund. That's exactly what it is a venture capital fund. And the person who ran that venture capital fund before Governor Walker was Mary Burke. As the head of the Department of Commerce, she was as responsible for these programs that they're giving out money to companies who are failing and not paying them back as he is. I don't know what part of that people think is any different. You're getting one team with, a puppet over here and a puppet over here. You're not getting actual difference between these two. These are the authoritarian candidates. I'm the libertarian candidate.
Very good. Thank you. Robert Burke of Hudson is a libertarian candidate for governor. Mr. Burke, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you.
Thank you.